Levi Redding dug graves for the same men who once hung his father, and when he found what was buried with them, he stopped burying the town's secrets and started digging them up. In the quiet town of Briar Hollow, nestled between rolling hills and whispering woods, lived a young man named Levi Redding. But Levi wasn't like the other townsfolk. He carried a heavy sadness in his heart, a shadow cast by a terrible injustice. At just 14 years old, Levi witnessed the unthinkable. His father, a good and honest man, hanged in the town square. The crime? Robbery. But Levi knew in his heart his father was innocent, a victim of lies and prejudice. Now, years later, Levi was the town's gravedigger. Each day, he walked among the silent stones, burying the very men who had condemned his father. He was a quiet soul, soft-spoken and reserved, but beneath the surface, a fire of resentment smoldered. He tended to the graves with care, a silent promise to his father that he would never forget. The graveyard was his sanctuary, a place where he could mourn and remember and perhaps, one day, find a way to bring the truth to light. The memory of that day was etched into Levi's mind like a dark, permanent scar. He remembered the bustling town square, usually filled with laughter and friendly chatter, now silent and heavy with dread. He remembered his father, a strong, kind man, standing tall despite the chains that bound him. The trial had been a sham, a cruel charade fueled by whispers and suspicion. The townsfolk, gripped by fear and swayed by the influential landowners, had quickly turned against the Reddings. The evidence was weak, circumstantial at best, but it didn't matter. They needed a scapegoat, someone to blame for the missing gold from the Briar Hollow bank. Levi remembered the judge's cold, unsympathetic gaze, the murmurs of the crowd, and the sickening thud as the rope tightened around his father's neck. He was just a boy then, powerless to stop the injustice. Now, years later, the memory still burned, fueling his quiet determination to uncover the truth and avenge his father's wrongful death. Each morning, Levi would rise before the sun, the chill of the graveyard seeping into his bones. He'd walk among the rows of weathered headstones, a silent observer of the town's history buried beneath the earth. His work was solitary, a constant reminder of his isolation. He knew the names on each stone, the stories behind them. Some were peaceful departures, others tragic accidents, and some were the men who had sealed his father's fate. Burying them brought a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. They were gone, but the injustice remained. Levi found a strange comfort in the routine. The digging, the planting of flowers, the quiet murmur of prayers, it was a way to honor the dead, even the ones he despised. But beneath the surface, the embers of his resentment still glowed, waiting for a spark to ignite them into a burning flame of truth. The graveyard held secrets, and Levi was determined to unearth them. The day started like any other. Old Mr. Abernathy, a recent arrival to the graveyard's permanent residence, was to be laid to rest. Levi dug the grave with practiced ease, the shovel biting into the soft earth. As he reached the required depth, his shovel struck something hard. Curiosity piqued, Levi knelt down, brushing away the loose soil. It wasn't a rock. It was a small wooden box, carefully wrapped in oilcloth. His heart quickened. People were sometimes buried with personal items, but this felt different. He carefully pulled the box from the earth, his hands trembling slightly. Back at his small cottage, he unwrapped the oilcloth, revealing the box's contents, a tarnished silver coin, intricately engraved with a symbol he vaguely recognized from the robbery reports, a symbol connected to the stolen gold. A wave of realization washed over him. This wasn't just a personal item, it was evidence. Evidence that could prove his father's innocence. Levi stared at the coin, the silver gleaming faintly in the dim light of his cottage. It was a tangible link to the past, a whisper from beyond the grave. A wave of hope washed over him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Could this be it? Could this be the key to unlocking the truth and finally clearing his father's name? He knew he couldn't rush into things. He needed to be careful, methodical. The people who framed his father were still out there, powerful and influential. He couldn't let them know what he had found, not yet. He carefully wrapped the coin back in the oilcloth and placed it in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of his cottage. It was safe for now. But the discovery had ignited a fire within him, a burning desire to seek justice, no matter the cost. He knew what he had to do. He had to investigate. He had to find out why Mr. Abernathy had this coin and what it meant. The next day, Levi started his investigation subtly. He visited the town's dusty old library, a place he hadn't been to since he was a boy. He asked the librarian, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, if he could look through the old town records. He pretended to be researching the history of Briar Hollow, hoping to deflect any suspicion. He spent hours poring over old newspapers and documents, searching for any mention of the robbery, any detail that might shed light on the coin and Mr. Abernathy's involvement. He learned that Mr. Abernathy had been a banker, a respected member of the community, and a close associate of some of the town's most influential families, the same families who had testified against his father. The pieces were starting to fall into place, painting a disturbing picture of conspiracy and betrayal. The spark of hope that had ignited within him now burned brighter, fueled by the possibility that he was finally on the right track. But he knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous. As Levi continued his research, he noticed subtle shifts in the town's atmosphere. People who had once greeted him with a nod now averted their gaze. Whispers followed him as he walked down the street. He felt eyes watching him from behind curtains. He tried to question some of the older residents about the robbery and Mr. Abernathy, but they were reluctant to talk, offering vague answers and nervous glances. It was as if a silent agreement had been made long ago to bury the past, and anyone who dared to disturb it was met with resistance. One afternoon, while visiting the general store, Mr. Harding, the owner, stopped him. "Levi," he said, his voice low and cautious, "some things are best left buried. You're stirring up trouble, son, trouble you might not be able to handle." The warning was clear. Someone knew what he was doing, and they didn't want him to continue. Levi knew he was getting closer to the truth, and that made him even more determined to keep digging. Despite the growing resistance, Levi refused to be deterred. He knew his father's name deserved to be cleared, and he wouldn't back down no matter the cost. One evening, while leaving the library, he noticed a figure lurking in the shadows across the street. He couldn't make out who it was, but he felt a chill run down his spine. He was being watched. The next day, as he was tending to a grave, a rock landed near his feet. He looked up to see two burly men standing by the graveyard fence, glaring at him. "You need to stop digging up the past, Redding," one of them growled. "It's for your own good." Levi stood his ground, his eyes filled with defiance. "My father was an innocent man," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "and I won't rest until the truth is revealed." The men scoffed and turned away, but Levi knew this was just the beginning. He was in danger, but he was also closer than ever to finding the truth. Feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable, Levi was surprised one afternoon when Mrs. Gable, the librarian, approached him. "Levi," she said softly, "I remember your father. He was a good man." Levi was taken aback. He hadn't expected anyone to speak so openly about his father. "You do?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise. "Yes," Mrs. Gable replied. "I never believed he committed that robbery. The trial, it wasn't fair. Everyone was so quick to judge." She paused, then added, "I might have something that could help you." She led him to a hidden room in the back of the library, a place filled with forgotten books and documents. She pulled out an old, leather-bound journal. "This belonged to my grandfather," she explained. "He was a close friend of your father. He wrote about the trial, about his doubts and suspicions." Levi's heart leaped with hope. He had found an ally, someone who believed in his father's innocence and was willing to help him uncover the truth. He wasn't alone anymore. Together, Levi and Mrs. Gable began deciphering the old journal. The faded ink revealed a shocking story of greed and corruption. Mrs. Gable's grandfather had suspected that Mr. Abernathy and several other prominent townsfolk had orchestrated the robbery themselves, framing Levi's father to cover their tracks. The journal mentioned secret meetings, hidden accounts, and a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Briar Hollow society. They found names, dates, and locations, a roadmap to the truth. The most damning piece of evidence was a detailed account of a meeting held the night before the robbery, where the conspirators discussed their plan and how to ensure Levi's father would take the blame. The journal even included a sketch of the silver coin, the same coin Levi had found buried with Mr. Abernathy. With each new discovery, Levi's resolve grew stronger, but so did the danger. They knew they were treading on dangerous ground, but they were determined to expose the truth, no matter the consequences. The conspirators, realizing Levi was closing in on the truth, escalated their efforts to silence him. One night, as Levi walked home from the library, he was ambushed. Two men, their faces hidden by scarves, grabbed him and dragged him into a dark alley. "You need to stop, Redding," one of them snarled, his voice muffled. "You're asking too many questions. Let the past be." Levi struggled, but they were too strong. "My father was innocent," he shouted. The other man punched him hard in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. "He got what he deserved," he hissed. "Now, if you know what's good for you, you'll drop this whole thing, or things could get a lot worse for you and the old woman." They released him, leaving him bruised and shaken in the alley. Levi knew they were serious. They were threatening Mrs. Gable now. He had to protect her, but he couldn't give up. He was too close. He had to find a way to expose the truth, even if it meant risking everything. Determined to protect Mrs. Gable, Levi decided to confront one of the men named in the journal, Mayor Harrison, a wealthy and influential figure in Briar Hollow. He knew it was a risky move, but he needed answers. He found Mayor Harrison at his office, a grand building overlooking the town square. "Mayor Harrison," Levi said, his voice trembling slightly, "I know about the robbery. I know you framed my father." The mayor's face hardened. "You have no proof, Redding," he said coldly. "These are just old stories." "I have the journal," Levi countered, "and the coin." Mayor Harrison lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar. "You think you can threaten me?" he roared. "You're nothing but a gravedigger. Your father was a thief, and you're just like him." A struggle ensued, but Levi, fueled by years of suppressed anger and grief, managed to break free. He knew he couldn't win in a fight, but he had planted a seed of doubt in the mayor's mind. The mayor knew that Levi knew the truth, and that was enough. Levi had to get the evidence to the authorities. Levi, now knowing the full extent of the conspiracy, understood that the robbery had been a carefully planned scheme orchestrated by Mayor Harrison, Mr. Abernathy, and a handful of other wealthy landowners. They had been struggling financially and saw the bank's gold as their salvation. They needed a scapegoat, someone to take the fall. Levi's father, a respected but relatively poor farmer, was the perfect target. They fabricated evidence, bribed witnesses, and swayed public opinion, ensuring his conviction. The silver coins were their way of dividing the stolen gold amongst themselves, a secret symbol of their betrayal. The entire town had been complicit, either actively participating in the conspiracy or turning a blind eye to the injustice. Levi felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over him. The people he had grown up with, the people he had trusted, had all played a role in his father's death. He knew he had to expose them no matter the consequences. He just needed a plan, but time was running out. As Levi considered his next move, a dark thought crept into his mind: revenge. He had the evidence, he knew who was responsible, and he could make them pay for what they had done to his father. He could use the knowledge he had gained to ruin them, to make them suffer as his father had suffered. He imagined confronting them one by one, revealing their crimes and watching their lives crumble around them. He pushed the darker thoughts away. He wasn't a killer, his father wouldn't want that, but the temptation was strong. The years of suppressed anger and grief threatened to consume him. He wrestled with his conscience, torn between his desire for justice and his fear of becoming the kind of person he despised. Was revenge the answer, or was there another way to bring them to justice, a way that wouldn't stain his soul? The decision weighed heavily on his heart. After a long night of soul-searching, Levi made his decision. He wouldn't succumb to the darkness. He wouldn't become like the men who had destroyed his father's life. He would seek justice, not revenge. He decided to expose the truth to the entire town, to let everyone know what had happened and who was responsible. He knew it was a risky move, but he believed that the truth, however painful, was the only way to heal the wounds of the past and build a better future for Briar Hollow. He enlisted Mrs. Gable's help to gather the townspeople in the square. He would present his evidence, tell his story, and let the town decide what to do. He knew there would be resistance, disbelief, and perhaps even violence, but he was prepared to face it all. He owed it to his father, and he owed it to himself. He was ready to bring the lies to light. The town square was filled with a hushed anticipation. Levi stood on a makeshift stage, his hands trembling slightly as he held up the silver coin. Mrs. Gable stood beside him, offering a reassuring smile. He began to speak, his voice clear and strong, telling the story of his father, the robbery, and the conspiracy that had destroyed his family. He presented the journal, the coin, and the evidence he had gathered, laying bare the lies and corruption that had festered in Briar Hollow for so long. He spoke of Mayor Harrison, Mr. Abernathy, and the other conspirators, naming them and detailing their roles in the scheme. He spoke of the fabricated evidence, the bribed witnesses, and the town's collective guilt in allowing an innocent man to be hanged. As he spoke, a wave of disbelief, anger, and shame washed over the crowd. Some gasped in shock, others wept openly, and some glared at Levi with hatred. But he continued, his voice unwavering, determined to speak the truth no matter the cost. The silence was broken. The town's reaction was immediate and divided. Some, particularly those who had always harbored doubts about Levi's father's guilt, were quick to believe him. They were horrified by the revelations and demanded justice. Others, especially those who were connected to the powerful families involved, refused to believe him. They accused him of lying, of seeking revenge, and of trying to tarnish the reputations of respected members of the community. They clung to the old narrative, unwilling to admit that they had been wrong all along. The town was torn apart, divided along lines of wealth, power, and loyalty. Families argued, friendships dissolved, and the once peaceful community was plunged into turmoil. Levi knew that exposing the truth had come at a cost, but he believed it was a necessary one. He just hoped that the town could heal and that justice would prevail. He could only wait and see. Despite the division and turmoil, Levi pressed forward, determined to clear his father's name through legal means. With the help of Mrs. Gable and those who believed him, he contacted the authorities outside of Briar Hollow, presenting them with the journal, the coin, and the testimonies of those who were willing to speak out. It was a long and arduous process, filled with legal challenges and attempts to discredit him. The powerful families involved used their influence to try to bury the truth once again, but Levi refused to give up. He worked tirelessly, gathering more evidence, tracking down witnesses, and fighting against the corruption that had plagued Briar Hollow for so long. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to see justice served and to finally clear his father's name. He was not alone in this fight. The truth was on his side. Finally, after months of investigation and legal battles, the truth prevailed. The authorities, convinced by the overwhelming evidence, arrested Mayor Harrison and the other conspirators. They were brought to trial, and their crimes were exposed for all to see. The trial was a sensation, drawing national attention to the small town of Briar Hollow. The evidence was irrefutable, and the jury found the conspirators guilty of robbery, conspiracy, and the wrongful conviction of Levi's father. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their power and influence stripped away. And most importantly, Levi's father was finally exonerated. His name was cleared and his honor was restored. A wave of relief and closure washed over Levi. Justice had finally been served. The truth had set them free. It was over. With his father's name cleared and the conspirators brought to justice, Levi finally found a sense of peace he had never known before. The weight of the past, the years of anger and resentment, lifted from his shoulders. The dark cloud that had hung over his life for so long finally dissipated, replaced by a glimmer of hope. He visited his father's grave, a simple stone marker in the quiet corner of the graveyard. He stood there for a long time, speaking to his father, telling him about everything that had happened, about the truth that had finally been revealed. He felt a sense of closure, a sense that he had finally fulfilled his promise to his father. He had avenged his wrongful death, not with violence or revenge, but with truth and justice. He could finally move on, leaving the tragedy of the past behind him. The nightmare was finally over. Levi continued his work as a gravedigger, but now with a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer saw the graveyard as a place of sorrow and resentment, but as a place of peace and remembrance. He tended to the graves with even greater care, honoring the lives of those who had passed, both the innocent and the guilty. Briar Hollow slowly began to heal the divisions.